So I went to therapy for that, thinking that I had an anger problem. Is that those insecurities that I formed as a child is unconscious, but it's how I've always pictured myself my entire life. So it totally makes sense that at 45 years old, unconsciously, when there is someone who has power over me in some way and I feel like I'm a helpless victim, that I'm going to lose my mind because I'm still rebelling against my dad.
Welcome to the Superhuman Life. I'm your host, Frank Rich, and this is the only podcast in the world dedicated to helping men break free from the shackles of addiction through the power of faith and fitness. It is our goal with every episode to help you take back control and rebuild your body, mind, and spirit. And we do so by bringing you real and raw conversations with people just like you, aiming to find their place in this world while dealing with the everyday struggles and battles that we all face. Now, it is my belief that we were all created for a specific purpose. And if we can harness that belief or faith, then take control of our mind and body or fitness, then we can ultimately create the life that we've always dreamed about, our own superhuman life. I want to let you know how grateful and blessed I am to have you here with me today. Let's get on to today's show. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another amazing and very exciting episode of the Superhuman Life. As always, guys, I'm your host, Frank Rich, and I just got to tell you how fired up I am for today's conversation. We have an incredible guest, a truly remarkable and amazing story, one just filled with transformation, filled with awakening moments, realizing that in order for us to truly step into the life that we were created to live, that there's going to be an element of killing off our past self, of completely changing and re-identifying a new identity for ourselves and fully embracing and stepping into that life. But before we get into today's conversation and introing our guest, let me just do a couple house cleaning items, guys. As always, I appreciate you for being here. We're so incredibly grateful for you guys. Here we are at episode 85. It's been quite a journey these last 2 years or so. And I just want to thank you once again for joining us here today, whether this is your first time with us here on the Superhuman Life or you've been around and enjoying our episodes for quite a while. There's two ways that you can help us continue to grow and help us support this show. First off, if you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe, whatever platform you're listening. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on. If you guys out there on the audio side of things, we appreciate you all. We're so grateful for every single listener that we do have. We're so grateful for the support of the show. And if you want to continue to help us grow this message, grow our audience, get this podcast in front of more people, you can help us in this two ways. Ratings and review, guys. This is the scorecard for podcasts. This is how these softwares, whether it's Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, wherever you're listening, this is how they track and are ranking certain particular shows. So if you guys are getting value out of these conversations, if the guests that we're bringing on, the talks, the episodes are having meaningful transformation in your life, do us a favor, guys, with taking a few minutes to drop a 5-star rating and written review. And then obviously, guys, if there's somebody in your life that needs to hear, whether it's today's conversation or any of the podcasts that we've had up until this point, do us a favor and share these episodes with them. And let me just remind you guys of our partner here at the Superhuman Life. We shared this recently on last week's episode that Covenant Eyes has decided to jump on board and sponsor the show. So today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Covenant Eyes. We love Covenant Eyes, what they do. They've been helping men and women fight and overcome pornography for over 21 years with their world-class accountability software and insightful educational resources. Covenant Eyes understands that people find freedom through supportive and authentic relationships. Now, Covenant Eyes has been around long enough to know that porn affects everyone, men, women, children, everyone. If you're struggling with porn, we have a message for you. You are not alone, and we are here to help, both at the Superhuman Life, at Rebuilt Recovery, our coaching business, and more importantly, this newfound partnership with Covenant Eyes. So what we've done for you guys here with the Superhuman Life and partnering with Covenant Eyes is we have a special offer for you. We'd like to give you a free 30-day trial to Covenant Eyes by using the promo code Superhuman at checkout. All you need to do, guys, is visit Covenant Eyes, at www.covenanteyes.com. That's COVENANT eyes, EYES.com. And enter that promo code. Promo code is Superhuman, one word, at checkout, and use it to get a 30-day trial. So guys, a lot of people ask me, how does Covenant Eyes work with some of the work that you do over there at Rebuild Recovery? Our business and our platform or our company is focused around helping men through a structured program, a 16-week curriculum. And I feel that Covenant Eyes is like the supplement regimen. If you came to me as a fitness coach, if you came to me and said, Frank, I want to lose 15 pounds. I want to put on 10 pounds of muscle. We would build you an exercise plan, training protocol, what you need to do 4 or 5 days a week when you step in the gym. We'd give you nutrition, whether it's macro-based, whether it's following a specific meal plan. And then once those two things are fully optimized, you can then look at taking it to the next level with something like a supplement. So if you're looking to get out of porn, it's got to start with a plan. I think you need to understand that if you're going to remove something out of your life, you have to have a plan to get that out of your life. So that's where something like what we've built over at Rebuild Recovery, or using the 7-step guide, or getting into our Facebook group to have some support and accountability. The Covenant Eyes is going to be the additional tool. It's going to be the additional supplement to your already proven strategy. So check them out, guys, at covenanteyes.com. Use the code Superhuman at checkout to get a free 1-month trial. But let's get on to today's guest, guys. Today I have with me Justin B. Long. Justin is an author, business owner, and host of the podcast Straight from the Horse Doctor's Mouth, which he produces with his wife, Dr. Erica Lacher. His best-selling book series, The Adventure of the Horse Doctor's Husband, has been enjoyed by readers all over the world. While his wife's mission is to make the world a better place for horses, Justin's mission is to make the world a better place for people by combating toxic masculinity ideas surrounding men and their emotions. His current book, The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy, is a raw, intense examination of his childhood, the traumatic events that formed his negative self-image, and his journey through therapy to overcome it all. So a couple things that Justin and I get into. Obviously, we talk a little bit about what was this upbringing, what were some of those traumatic events. For those of you that are familiar with adverse childhood experiences, Justin shares his experience with 5 out of those 10 truly traumatic experiences and events that Justin had to go through as a young man. We talk about some of the moments that he had kind of in identifying some of his own vices and how some of his own behaviors were holding him back. We get into his journey into AA and how that was kind of the catalyst for him transforming his life, but how it wasn't enough. I talk a lot about my opinions on 12 steps, and it was amazing to see somebody that's had success in that also share a very similar perception on it as well. Obviously, we talk about some of the work that he's doing with his books and unpacking his new book, The Righteous Rage of the 10-Year-Old Boy, which we'll link down here in the show notes before. But if anybody that struggled with identity issues, anybody that struggled with traumatic events in their past, if anybody struggled with overcoming some anger and not how to deal with the emotions, and really how to understand these masks that we put on, especially as men. What are these masks that we wear, and why do we seem to use them as the default mode? Guys, this is the conversation for you. So without further ado, guys, let's get into today's episode with Justin B. Long. Hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll see you on the other side. Justin, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Thanks, Frank. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really excited about this conversation. We were just chatting a bit here offline, and as I was telling you, with everything you have doing, I think this is going to be really fascinating, from the authorship, the fiction books, and your latest book, which I think we'll spend a lot of time here today, kind of unpacking some of that, and then maybe even I'm curious, kind of some of these things that you're doing with the wife and the podcast, and kind of how you guys are kind of bringing everything together with her working with animals and horses, and kind of how you play a role in the company as well. So really excited about today's conversation. But Justin, I mean, your story is so compelling and fascinating. So I think the best thing here for the listeners is let's kind of go back, to the beginning here. I mean, you just released this book called The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy. And, one thing that really stood out to me in that book, and kind of I've heard you say this a few times as well, is you've mentioned that it was inevitable for you to become an alcoholic. So just kind of curious kind of what you mean, because I pay attention to words very, very closely. And, and I'm sure you do as well, especially being an author. So I don't think you just said that without understanding what it meant. So just curious, kind of what you meant by it being inevitable, and yeah, just kind of maybe take us back a little bit to maybe some of your upbringing, and we'll just kind of go through this story, this journey that you've been on through your life, and see if we can add some value to the listeners. So yeah, just kind of where did it all start, and what did you mean by it was inevitable for you to be an alcoholic?
I have no doubt in my mind that it was inevitable for me to become an alcoholic. And I know that because I've come to understand why I became an alcoholic. And that's been the benefit of sobriety and therapy and a lot of years of self-evaluation and really unpacking my story and understanding the why behind the what. But I grew up with two very emotionally dysfunctional parents. And my dad was a rageaholic and a workaholic, and he spent a lot of time not being happy with the world around him. And I understand that my dad was a product of his environment growing up, just like my mom was a product of her environment growing up. And she was very emotionally damaged by her parents. But this cycle of destruction got passed on to me. And if you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences, I had 5 out of the 10. And anything over 4, you are extremely likely to end up in some sort of addiction and self-harm behavior and all of that stuff. So I had the complete recipe of everything that I needed to become an alcoholic or an overeater or somebody that's into thrill-seeking behavior or gambling, any of the things that we do to try to change the way we feel about ourselves. And I started that very young. My dad, being the workaholic, he believed that if he was awake, he needed to be working, and I should be working with him too. So as young as 5, 6 years old, I had an extensive chore list, and we would work till 10 o'clock, midnight sometimes on whatever project that he had going on when he came home from work. But for me, the difficulty in that wasn't the work itself. It was the fact that no matter how many of my chores I completed in a row every day without doing anything wrong, I still got punished for shortcomings. So, if it was splitting firewood and stacking the firewood box, if the firewood stack wasn't perfect, I would get a spanking for all of the pieces of wood that were sticking out of line. And if we replaced the water line once, and if I had to dig the ditch for that, and if the ditch varied from the depth that it was supposed to be, or it wasn't perfectly straight, then I would get a spanking for that. So it was that times 1,000. I had all these chores as a kid, and instead of getting the pat on the back or the satisfaction of knowing that I did a job well, I got punished for everything that I did. And so I created beliefs about myself at a very young age that no matter how hard I try, I'm going to fail. No matter what I bring to the table, it's not going to be good enough. And the people in charge of me are never going to be satisfied with me and my effort. And so when my primary caregivers reject me, it makes sense that I would reject myself too. And that became a self-fulfilling prophecy all throughout life. And, I rebelled against my parents. I rebelled against every authority figure in my life. I was probably a horrible student for teachers all through school because I took that belief from home and I brought it with me. So I assumed that because they were in charge of me, they were going to be disappointed in me too. And the kids in my class rejected me. I wasn't cool. I didn't have the latest clothes and all that stuff. So I felt everywhere that I turned. And you can only feel bad about yourself like that for so long before you start trying to do something about it. And I started reading books, I think at 5 or 6. We didn't have a television in my house, but I was searching for escapism. I needed a way out. And so I started reading books in a way that was almost dissociative at 5 and 6 years old, just trying to go to another universe and get away from my life. And I followed that with tobacco as a teenager. I remember my first dip of Copenhagen made me feel fantastic. It made me feel different. And the guy that gave it to me, he showed me acceptance, and I needed that. Like I craved that so bad. And I just started searching for those kinds of experiences. And alcohol was fantastic for me. Alcohol made me feel better about myself in a way that nothing in the world ever had. And the people that I drank with accepted me and showed me all of the emotional support that I wasn't getting anywhere else. So that just really ramped up the behavior because I wanted more of that feeling, right? So I wanted that as often as possible, and I started doing it every day, chasing that feeling of feeling okay about myself and being accepted by others. But it's a it's a solution with a diminishing return, as all things that we do external to try to change how we feel internal are, right? So, the older I got, the less it worked, and the more my bad feelings about myself on the inside really dominated my existence.
Yeah. So when did you? I don't want to say you found alcohol, but when did the problem kind of really? I think you said somewhere in high school is maybe when you had your first taste or sip of it. So at what point did it really kind of become this this mechanism that you use for self-soothing or escapism, and it really became an issue? Was it immediately in high school, or did that not really happen until later into adulthood?
I was 13 the first time that I got drunk, and I think I was 15 the second time. So I had some space in there where I experienced it and I really enjoyed it, but I had very little opportunity. But in high school, by the time I was 17, I was able to buy alcohol pretty much anywhere in town. I lived in a small town out in Wyoming, and back in the 90s, I guess they weren't big into karting and all that stuff. So I got away with buying a lot of booze before I should have, but I was drinking every weekend through my junior and senior year of high school. Like that was the thing. Friday night, Saturday night, I was out with my two best friends just getting annihilated. And I was making horrible decisions with drinking even at that point. I was drinking and driving constantly. It horrifies me to think about the thousands of times that I have driven drunk and don't even remember driving. And I lived 30 miles out in the country. It's not like I was just driving around the block from wherever we were partying. I was like serious driving. And that every weekend thing became every day as soon as I went to the Army. And it was, the Army was an important part of my evolution too, because even though I was drinking every day and drinking a lot, I was also in a group of people that accepted me and showed me all of that emotional support and love that I hadn't been getting anywhere except from my two best friends in high school. And that really, I associated the drinking and the friends thing, the feeling of acceptance. And it never ever occurred to me, even when it all stopped working, that the alcohol wasn't solving my problem. And I think that self-discovery and self-insight is a really challenging thing if you don't have any help or outside influence to help you understand what it is that you're trying to figure out. But so all I knew at that point in my life is that drinking was fantastic. And even when it wasn't fantastic, I didn't know how else to be. So I just kept doing it anyway.
Yeah. Wow. I love what you just said there. Self-discovery, it's not like you're not going to do it. Like you're not going to discover yourself on your own. It's going to take, a set of outside eyes, many times multiple outside eyes. What was the relationship at home or kind of, within the family with substances? Was alcoholism or substance abuse, was it something that ran through your family? I mean, maybe not directly with your parents, but aunts, uncles, cousins is as well. There's so many parallels kind of between our upbringing. I've had to, forgive my parents for a lot of things, forgive my dad. There was a long time I held on to some anger and some grief there, and I was like, I'm going to prove you wrong, this and that. And it kind of fueled a lot of the decisions that I take. And ultimately, like this journey that I've been on these last few years have been centered all around forgiveness. Like, I don't think that they, knowingly did anything wrong in the way that they parented us. I mean, it obviously led me to make some destructive decisions myself. But one thing for me is I saw substance abuse, directly around me from a very young age. I don't know if I identified it as an abuse, more around just kind of a casual use, but, family events, anytime the family was around, like there was always, one or two male figures in the family that couldn't really control there. So at the time, as I was growing and being raised, I would see people like, oh, when you're in a social setting, it's okay to drink too much and be obnoxious, like almost like that was accepted. So for you, what was kind of the relationship at home or kind of in your families?
It's funny. I don't have anybody even in my extended family that I'm aware of, especially as a child, that drank or smoked. Like it was, from all outward appearances, it was the straight edge family. Everybody went to church, especially, my mom and dad. My mom was deep off into extreme religiosity challenges early on in her life, and searching for answers that she couldn't find. But I never saw anybody using anything in terms of a chemical to try to do anything, whether it was party or self-medicate or anything else. Like, it just was not part of my environment. And not having hardly any exposure to television, my only real exposure to drinking was through books, and it's all glamorized most of the time. And I remember reading Louis L'Amour's westerns when I was young, and the idea of the lone cowboy, riding across the range and having a shot of whiskey, and when he would come into town to clear the dust out of his throat, like that I liked that idea, that A, he didn't have anybody around him that was making his life horrible, and B, he got to do cool manly things, right? Have a shot at the bar and probably beat up some bad guy. And so that was my idea of what drinking was. It was very, very vague and romanticized at a young age. So I think when I found alcohol, my parents were they got into historical reenactment and kind of the mountain man Indian rendezvous scene. It's sort of like Civil War reenactment stuff, but all pre-1840 stuff, and which is its own story. But in that environment, we would go out and go camping for the weekends, and everybody would sit in a big circle around a bonfire and play guitars and pass the jug of moonshine around. And that I was 13 the first time I participated in that, and I think I'd been watching that for about a year. And even in that setting, everybody was having a great time. There would be a few guys that got drunk, but all they did was whoop and shout and be funny, and everybody would laugh. And like, it was I don't want to say wholesome, but it was as wholesome as it can be for something like that. And so I never had any understanding of the dark side of it.
Got it. Was your dad a military man? You talked about his kind of discipline, and he was passing down to you what his environment passed him. So I know you joined the military, but was some of his upbringing fueled by a military background, or what do you think led him to be this man that didn't understand emotions and yeah, just.
My dad, he was in the Army, and I think he was in the Army Reserve, the regular Army, and the Navy Reserve over at different points in his life. So he spent a lot of time in the military. But I think that stuff probably appealed to him in a way because of the rigid environment that it provides. But my dad grew up under a hard-nosed taskmaster of his dad. And I really think the more that I talked to my dad's sisters, and I understand better who my grandpa was when he was younger. I only see him as the kindly old man that runs the Boy Scout troop. I never saw him, when he was 25 or 35 and in the depths of his whatever, probably overcoming his own childhood. But my dad was the oldest child, just like I am. And I think that, in that position, you're bearing the brunt of your parents learning how to be parents and still overcoming their own childhood stuff, because people have kids generally pretty young. So I think all of the stuff that my dad did to me was an unconscious effort to get that approval from his dad that he never got. And I think that's why he tried to work himself to death, because he wanted to show his dad that he could do all of this stuff and that he could be good enough. And my grandpa was the same way. Even into his 80s and 90s, he would be out in the shop working on something, tinkering with a motor or something until 10 o'clock at night, and then come in and watch the news and go to bed. Like the concept of not working, it was just foreign in that family line for some reason. And I really have to work at that today, as a entrepreneur, and I got several different ventures going with side businesses and running the vet clinic with my wife and all these things. The tendency for me is to work 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I feel guilty if I'm going to sit around and watch an episode of Doctor Who or go for a walk somewhere. It's like, I have to remind myself it's not only okay for me to not work. I have the responsibility to myself to unplug the brain. But if I never sat down and got conscious about that with a therapist and people who could help me see my own behavior, I think I would forever repeat the cycle that my dad repeated, and his dad probably repeated it from his dad. It's just, it's an unconscious driver.
Yeah. So how were you able to come to that realization, and what, if any, tips do you have to maybe pass along? We have a lot of entrepreneurs. We have a lot of people that are chasing dreams. Whether it's building a business or achieving a physical transformation. I myself come from a bodybuilding background, and it can be very compulsive space to operate from, like just always feeling like you got to do something physical, whether it's an extra cardio or an extra weight session. So how do you kind of, when did you come to the realization that you needed more of a balance in your life? I know you mentioned therapy there. And then what, if anything, do you do now, whether it's on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, just to ensure that you're maintaining that level of balance?
It has been a long journey, and for me, all roads lead to self-discovery and self-understanding. And so I had to come to understand why I'm driven to do the various things that I'm doing and why I react to things the way that I react. And this last round of therapy that I got into really helped me pinpoint what's going on, because I have all of this self-knowledge. I've been on this trail for 13 years of trying to understand who I am and change the things that I don't like about myself. So I have a pretty good understanding that, insecurities drive my behaviors, and experiences that I've had have helped me form self-beliefs, but I didn't understand how to overcome all that stuff. And so when I got about a year and a half ago, I got linked up with my therapist that I have now. And we started taking apart my insecurities, because I went to her because I felt like I had an anger problem. Like things would trigger me and piss me off, and I would really have a hard time managing myself in a professional capacity. And as a business owner, I don't want to be losing my shit on AT&T every time something goes wrong and I have to talk to them on the phone. But I would find myself, I've dialed 1-800 and I'm already so angry that my hand's shaking. Because I'm anticipating that it's going to go poorly, right? So I really had to figure out why that's happening to me, and if I'm going to be the leader and the entrepreneur that I want to be, I need to be in better control of my emotions. So I went to therapy this go around for that, thinking that I had an anger problem. And what I found out is that those insecurities that I formed as a child from my dad, the authority figure, being over me and me always losing and feeling helpless, that is unconscious, but it's how I've always pictured myself my entire life. So if I haven't addressed that, it totally makes sense that at 45 years old, unconsciously, when there is someone who has power over me in some way and I feel like I'm a helpless victim, that I'm going to lose my mind because I'm still rebelling against my dad and that feeling that I'm not good enough and I'm trapped. So a lot of therapy over a lot of different scenarios that played out in my childhood, I realized all of them, even though, I have 25 different scenarios that we worked through, or 50 or whatever it was, they all formed like the same basic two or three insecurities. And those insecurities have driven everything in my life. And, when I'm not feeling good enough, it's, I tend to try to prove my worth to the people around me, and prove my dominance, or prove that I am smarter than you are and I'm better than you are at whatever it is. Because I had the understanding that in order to be respected or accepted, or to even feel okay about myself, that I have to be dominating somebody else. I have to have absolute control over someone else the way that my dad had absolute control over me. And understanding that AT&T doesn't even know my name. It's not like they're out to get me. They're like having board meetings about how we're going to screw Justin B. Long. That it's, the situation sucks, but it has nothing to do with me. Understanding that has been a major help for me. But even more than that is getting into those insecurities, and trying to figure out what really happened in those situations that formed those insecurities to begin with. And with the firewood example, we heated our house with a wood stove, and I stacked firewood in the firewood bin, and I carried it in and filled the box on the inside of the house every day in the wintertime for years. and the house never went cold. The stove was never without fire. The firewood box was never without firewood. I did my job. I split it, I stacked it, I did all of the stuff. The fact that I got punished for it has nothing to do with the effort that I made or my value or what I'm bringing to the table. It has everything to do with my dad trying to work out some insecurity on his part. He's still, it's unconscious on his part. He's not even thinking about me. His whole world's falling apart. And I used to think that my dad controlled everything, that he dominated the whole world. But when I realized that, he had a job, he had a wife that was mentally unstable and emotionally unstable. Like, he had cars that were broke down constantly, a house that needed to be worked on all the time. Like, everything in my dad's world was falling apart. And the only thing that he actually had control over was me. And I was aspiring to something that doesn't exist. Nobody dominates everything. Nobody. I mean, even as a business owner, we're serving our clients and customers. We're, constricted by all of these things. You can't run around and just be a jerk and expect people to throw money at you. There's no existence of complete dominance where somebody is just the supreme warrior and rules the world. It's a fantasy, but I had never thought about it like that. I never sat down and wrote out my idea of what it is that I was yearning for. It was all just under the surface, trying to find that feeling. But that feeling of acceptance, it doesn't matter how much I get that from other people. If I don't accept myself, it's never going to get me where I'm trying to be. And that was the other thing that I didn't understand, is that I spent all my life searching for external validation. And I was never satisfied with that, whether it was through sex. And even in a committed relationship, I sought out sex with every woman that I ran across because I unconsciously needed them to accept me. And that's the ultimate form of acceptance in my mind. Because my parents didn't show any sort of emotional anything around the house. I didn't know how to feel or how to treat other people. All I ever saw was rage and hostility and just hysterical breakdowns. So I didn't understand how to even be accepted, much less how to accept myself. And understanding that I do have all the value and that I am good enough no matter what the topic is, and that it doesn't matter what other people think of me. That is how I overcame those insecurities. And now I understand that when they're triggered, because they're always going to be there, the automatic response still happens, but I have to do a manual override and think to myself, this is not personal. It does not impact my value. Nobody is dominating me. Nobody's taking anything away from me. This is just a situation, and I feel feelings about it, and it's okay for me to feel those feelings, and we're going to go through this. And everything that I do today has to be intentional like that. Like, I have to think it out and be intentional and not just knee-jerk react to everything. And that's how I've overcome these challenges and tried to become a better leader and business person.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful point that you're making right there, and it really rings true with a lot of the work that I do outside of this podcast and the coaching and helping men over at Rebuild Recovery. You said you had to get to the point where you realize these old thoughts, some of these memories, they're never going to completely go away. It's what you do with it the moment that thought occurs, and that's what I had to tell the men of Rebuild Recovery. I shared with you before we started recording, I help men that are struggling with pornography, and a lot of times it's a trigger, overcoming these temptations. And it's like, brother, you need to realize we're living in 2021. The temptations they're not going to go away. You're not going to wake up at the end of this program and never feel the pull or the urge to go look at pornography again. But what you need to realize is you're in control of what happens the minute that urge makes its way or the minute that trigger comes. So what is your process? You kind of mentioned it briefly, kind of what you do with analyzing, figuring out where it's coming from. But do you have an actual step-by-step process that you walk through when some of these old feelings or old thoughts about your past self kind of arise? Maybe there's a point we can kind of pass along to the listeners here, whether they're dealing with some of these thoughts about themselves or they're dealing with urges and temptations or triggers or et cetera. I think it kind of transfers across multiple spectrums here. So when that moment occurs where it's kind of like the past thoughts or the past beliefs about yourself, what's your process that you walk through?
Daniel Goleman wrote a book a long time ago called Emotional Intelligence. And he's got a phrase in there that he uses. You got it right there. It says,
It
my
happens
amygdala.
at least once every episode. Somebody will mention a book, and then it's always behind me here.
Yep. But he's got the phrase that says, and I've heard him on several podcasts where he uses it. He says, my amygdala has been hijacked. And like, that is the first thing I have to think about. And when I say it out loud or even just think it, as soon as I become aware that my amygdala has been hijacked, I am feeling rage, or I'm feeling beat up, or less than, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's the feeling is immaterial. It's all the same process, is that we acknowledge, I am feeling this feeling. My amygdala has been hijacked and I am angry. And as soon as you recognize that, you stop being controlled by the emotion and you become an observer. And then you are able to take control. And that takes a while to form that habit. But when I train myself that every time, and then sometimes it would be 2 hours after the fact, I was like, shit, my amygdala got hijacked and I didn't even catch it until now, But you do that enough times, you get better and better at it. It's like training anything, strength training or behavioral training. Like it's responding to the stimulus and becoming aware of it faster and faster and faster. But the other thing that I do that I've found super helpful, and, like I said, I've read a million books as a kid, but one of them was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And there is a scene in there. There's a planet that people have been extinct for, a million years, but they were a super civilization before they went extinct, and they had a missile defense system on this planet. So it's a dead planet. There's nobody there that's alive, but there's still an automated computer-controlled missile defense system. And when a spaceship gets too close to that planet, it will launch missiles at them. And for whatever reason, that just resonates with me in terms of the way my brain works. That I've got all of these, even though I have fixed these insecurities or the understandings and beliefs that I've had about myself, there's still automated responses that have been in place for 45 years. And those missiles are going to fire. And it's my job to realize the missile's fired. I've got to abort mission. We're not actually shooting anything down. It was an automated response, and I will take over from here. My amygdala got hijacked. We shot the missiles. We're going to stop the missiles, and I'm taking charge. I've got it from here. And, I can do that in a nanosecond most of the time when I'm on top of my game. And sometimes, it's still 20 minutes into it before I realize. Sometimes my wife has to say, your amygdala got hijacked. And that's a really important tool that I use, not just with my wife, but with everybody that works for our vet clinic. I empower the people around me to help me recognize when this is happening. Because, it's not like a big shameful secret that I've got to hide under wraps that people might know that Justin gets pissed off about things, but he doesn't mean it. The more open I am with this stuff and I empower the people around me to become part of my process, the faster I get the hang of this stuff and I can head it off at the pass. Like if I've been freaking out on people at the vet clinic for 20 minutes, like it's just as much their fault for not pointing it out to me as it is my fault for being subject to an automated thing. And I don't blame them for that, but we create a positive environment where it's safe for people to point out to me that's going on. And I think that doing that with people in your life, regardless of what the capacity is, whether it's friends or coworkers or employees or people above you or whatever it is, giving people the power to point out your behavior to you will take years off of the process of learning all of this stuff on your own.
Yeah, well, it's you're empowering them, but then you're also, in a way, empowering yourself to be ready to receive that feedback. If you never willingly said, hey, when I'm being an asshole, let me know. If somebody knocks on your door, hey, Justin, you've been really angry at everybody, but you didn't actually tell them to let you know about that, there might be this shield up where like you're not willing to accept the feedback. You're not willing to accept the criticism by you openly saying, hey, like this is something that I'm working through. I want you guys all to know, like if I'm acting this way, I want you to call me out. So you've created this open, communication where they feel empowered to share it with you, but you're also open to receive that feedback. I got to imagine as a leader, as a boss, or team leader, whatever, or even in a family dynamic. Like, I mean, that's got to be an very empowering environment to operate from.
It's fantastic. And we've gamified it to a degree that one of my big things is understanding what my triggers are is being hungry. When my blood sugar drops, I'm the poster child for the Snickers commercial, right? And so one of the things that we did to head that off is that we have snacks at the clinic, and people oftentimes won't even ask me if my amygdala is triggered or whatever. They'll just ask me if I need something to eat. Yep. You need a granola bar, or just bring me a granola bar. Nothing even needs to be said. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm because we're not ever going to be 100% at recognize our own behavior all the time, right? But we can do things like that really help us get it under control.
Yeah, and I love the act of kind of separating yourself from the thought. Like your verbiage here, the way that you phrase it, it's your amygdala has been hijacked. Last week we had a PhD licensed psychologist on that helps people with overcoming eating addiction or food addiction. He wrote a book called Never Binge Again. I think he's approaching 1 million copies sold. Dr. Glenn Livingston, and I asked him a very similar question, and it was revolved around eating. And what he does is he's named this, and he's characterized the voice inside when you're telling yourself you're hungry. He's called his inner pig. But by giving it a caricature, you now have something that you could battle, you could fight. So just like here, it's like these thoughts are not me. This is my amygdala that has been hijacked by something else outside of me. Now I can put a defense and actually fight where this is coming from. We're saying, oh, this is just me, how I always think. Now you're kind of defenseless because this is you. You're attaching an identity of yourself to those thoughts. So I love it's a very subtle, it's a very subtle play with words there, but I think it's incredibly powerful. I want to kind of get back to the recovery here. I think we're at the point where you're in the Army and you kind of stumble across this first mentor. I know it's not as simple as finding the right people in your life and then boom, you flip a switch and then now you're here, author, best-selling book, podcasting, et cetera, et cetera. So I know there's still some work that had to take place there. So kind of pick us up there where you kind of come across these first guys and they start kind of speaking this awareness and you kind of start having these self-discovery moments. How does that kind of carry us through? And then AA, and then I know that wasn't enough for you, so we had to get into therapy. Yeah, let's just kind of pick the story back up there.
Yeah, I was only in the active Army for 3 years, and I found out really fast that, I went into the Army thinking I had a problem with my dad, and I found out in the Army that I had a problem with everybody in charge of me. And in the Army, everybody's in charge of you, so I could not get out of there fast enough. But I still ended up working for the Army for a long time as a civilian contractor. But I continued to drink all throughout my 20s and all the way up till I was 32. And I finally made it into AA at 32. And that was the first time in my life I ever heard men, especially, but people in general, talking about how they felt about themselves and not feeling good about themselves. And up until that point, I was convinced that I was the only guy on the planet that had feelings. I didn't know if I was gay or if I was broken. Like I have all of these emotions inside, and the only thing anybody else seems to have is rage and lust. But I don't know what to do with all this. And I found in AA that it's not just me. It's just that everybody else around me was wearing a mask, and I was too naive to see it. I was wearing my own mask, but it never occurred to me that everybody else was too. So I was just comparing my insides to everybody else's outsides and coming up short. But I found out that there was not actually anything wrong with me in that regard, that I am a human being with 27 emotions like everybody else, or whatever the number is. And it has taken me, that was in 2008. And in 2010, I found Roland, who became my mentor. And he really taught me how to self-evaluate, how to self-explore, and figure out who I am when I take all of those masks off, and why I reject that person so bad. And it was amazing to me, because it was so gradual over the course of my life, how much I had buried my identity and who I really was. And I had just piled on all of these things that I thought other people would find acceptable or, would want me to be. And so, every aspect of me was the opposite of my true identity. And when I started stripping all that stuff away and exploring what I like to do and who I really am, that was the beginning of the transformation for me. That's when I stopped being the 35 layer deep mask, and I started being who Justin really is. And the first thing I did was I got into music. I had all these thoughts in my head about what manliness is all about, and so I had abandoned any of the creative art stuff. But I love playing music. I formed a band. We wrote some songs. We recorded an album in my living room, and I had a fantastic time for 4 or 5 years that lasted. And then I got into painting, and I found out I'm not very good at painting, but I really enjoy it. I enjoy the process. And that led me to all kinds of stuff. Now I build websites, I write books, and I do all of these things that satisfy my creative urge. And I really feel like, I have a ton of potential, and there's a lot of things that I want to explore, and I'm not prevented from doing any of that by what I think other people might think of me. And the freedom that has come with that is unbelievable. When I stop living my life to someone else's, not even someone else's expectations, but my conception of what someone else's expectation is, because I don't even know what I think most of the time. How am I really going to identify what somebody else thinks of me based on, an expression or a perceived dismissal or slight or something, right? But I've done that most of my life. I spent most of my life still, running around with the opinion of myself that was given to me by a 10-year-old kid on a playground in 1985. Like, what the hell does that kid know about who I am? Nothing. But, his negative comment dominated me unconsciously for 30 years after that. So really coming to terms with who I am and why I do what I do, and making sure that my motives are clear on that, and that I'm not doing it to try to get validation from somebody else. I'm doing it because I'm trying to live to my capacity, and this is something that satisfies that for me. And the direction of my life has changed so drastically. The productivity that I have. When I was 32 and I quit drinking, I had a job that I hated. I worked for a guy that I despised, but it was the best paying job in town. And I felt like, I have to make the most money possible in order to be, right? And so I was miserable in my relationship. I was miserable in my job, and I was going nowhere. I wasn't climbing any ladders, and I was a self-fulfilling prophecy of rejection and failure. And when I changed my attitude and my understanding of who I am and how I feel about myself, everything in my life has exploded. I've got a podcast that's listened to in 50 countries around the world. I got people all over the world reading my books, and that stuff is external, and I don't build my sense of self on that, but I do get a great deal of satisfaction that I'm putting a product out into the world that other people can appreciate. And I like that. That's a good feeling. I feel like I'm not just existing, I'm actually participating in the world and trying to make a contribution to the global collective of humanity, right? Trying to make the world a better place. And with this project, I'm really taking that another step and trying to help the lessons that I've learned about myself, reflect on other people, so that they can perhaps do some self-evaluation and see if maybe they're going wrong about how they're operating. So it's a night and day difference in my understanding of what living is about, and about identity and all of that stuff. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. I mean, I've shared my story here numerous times, and touched on it briefly, before recording with you. But you attach your identity to a false belief about a childhood, or I think you said a 10-year-old on the playground, what they told you, thought you were. For me, my identity was wrapped up in the word husky for decades. Growing up, I'm a big person. I'm 6'3", 250 pounds, and I've always been large. So when I was a kid, like JCPenney's and Sears, like they had this department in the youth boys clothing. It would go from regular, then they had the big and tall, but in between there was husky. And this wasn't really fat people, but it was like he didn't fit in the slim jeans. And I can remember attaching my identity to the word husky for decades. It fueled every decision I made about what I put into my body, about the amount of time that I spent in the gym. It literally led me down a 20-year journey in getting into bodybuilding. I don't regret any of that, but a lot of it was fueled by this false identity. A lot of it was fueled by anger. I no longer wanted to be the not normal kid. Normal people wore regular pants. Fat people wore husky jeans. I didn't want to be associated with that. So I did everything within my power to be the leanest, but also the biggest, strongest, powerful. And my life turned around at the beginning of 2019 after a series of events. And one of them being I shattered my hand. I ended up breaking every metacarpal, I think that's what they're called. But yeah, I mean, it never even sat itself and corrected itself properly. But I broke this hand, and the doctor's like, 6 months, you can't go into the gym. And I'm like, Doc, I haven't not trained a day in like a decade. Like, what am I going to do? He's like, I don't care, but you're not stepping foot into a gym. And in those 6 months, I ended up, I got off all the extra supplementation, et cetera, et cetera. I ended up losing like 40 pounds. And I was the skinniest I'd been since graduating high school. I was the lightest I'd been in over 2 decades. But in those moments is when I kind of found myself and found this new journey and this new mission that I've been on. And I realized like nobody cared how big and muscular and strong Frank was. They cared about who Frank was inside. They cared about his heart, and they cared about what he had to deliver and serve the world. So I think we're all better off because of you getting clean and sober, and we're incredibly and the world is impacted by your work. So I thank you for sharing all that, and I know the audience is going to really resonate. I love that you talk about your willingness in therapy, and we kind of mentioned it here with emotions and how you kind of grew up without even understand, like you're like, is something wrong with me if I have these feelings and things? So if you can, maybe just speak to the guy that's out there and he's masking these emotions, and like why is it okay for men to express feelings? Why is it okay for men to maybe cry if that's what's called upon, or why is it okay for men to attend therapy? Just speak to that a little bit if you can.
You bet. That's something I am so incredibly passionate about, is trying to understand social acceptability and my role as a man, and how all of these constructs come together, because they didn't come together for me. They were at complete odds with one another. And I think that in a lot of ways, our culture really drives that. Like, you learn as a 2-year-old kid that boys don't cry. When you fall down, you get up and you keep trucking on, and you don't ever display any sort of, hurt. It's not okay. And you're allowed 2 tears at a funeral, but that's it, and only if it's your mom. It's these notions that we squash all of our feelings. And what happens is that we grow up, and then we don't know, we have these feelings, we don't know what to do with them. And you can only crush them down for so long. And you look at people that are bitter and emotionally violent, it's because they don't have any tools for dealing with those emotions. And I was that person for a long time. And most people, are. It's not something that we really talk about in our society. And I think that that's finally starting to change. And I'm very grateful for that, because for me to not feel okay about who I am because of these ideas that I'm getting from wherever, is super self-destructive. But the most important thing that Roland ever told me was that the only opinion of me that counts is mine. And the only opinion of you that counts is yours. And that was just, it seems obvious, but it was a stunning revelation to me that it does not matter what anybody thinks about me. I need to think positively about myself. And when I am who I am, and I feel what I feel, and I own that, and I just, I don't hide that from anybody. Some people are going to love me for it, and some people are going to hate me for it. And that's okay. Both ways, it's okay. But the important part of that is that I love myself, because when I am wearing all these masks and trying to be somebody that I'm not, there are some people that love me for that and some people that hate me for that. But in that scenario, I'm on the side of things where I'm one of the people that hates me. And you can't live that way. You cannot do it. Roland gave me an analogy one time that was fantastic. He said, you can go to the top of the tallest skyscraper in the world and throw a rock off the roof. And for the vast majority of the time that rock is falling, it's going to think it's flying. It has no reason not to think that it's flying until the very end when it realizes that the ground is rushing up and it's about to crash. And that was me. That was me for 35 years of my life. I thought I was flying and I was really falling. And the ground is going to come up at some point. It happened fast for me, thank God. There's people that I've met in recovery that never came to these understandings about themselves until they were in their 60s or 70s. And that doesn't mean that it's too late, but it's an awful lot of wasted time. So for me, it's knowing that the important thing is that I'm okay with me no matter what, and that I don't do anything that's sacrificing my values because of what somebody else might think. That I need to be true to what I believe in and who I am no matter what. And no one can obligate me to anything except for me, and my opinion of me is the only one that counts. And like that's as simple as I can get on my rules for living and living positive and living true.
Yeah, that's great, and I would say I have to agree with you. We are seeing a shift in acceptance of the conversations, and I'd like to feel like maybe the work we're doing here is playing a role. How big or small that role that we're playing, we'll leave that up to people to determine themselves. But I feel these conversations that we have here and some of the experts that we've had on definitely play a role. You're 12-step guy, correct?
Yeah.
But I also have heard you speak that for you, maybe 12 steps wasn't complete. It wasn't enough, and you needed the additional therapy and some of the work that you've done since kind of leaving that. If you can maybe, speak to your experience. I've been open. I'm not against the program. I'm not against 12 steps. It's done an amazing work in millions of people's lives. I still have friends that are involved in organizations and still to this day meet weekly. But in my opinion, I think it holds people back. I think it keeps them attached to the identity of an addict. So I'm just curious your experience, because I've heard you kind of speak about how you needed some therapy to help you even work through some of the things that maybe 12 steps didn't fulfill. So yeah, just kind of what's your take on the role of 12 steps and how can people use that without not being attached to that old identity, and then what role did therapy play in your recovery?
12-step programs are wonderful and fantastic and extremely limited all at the same time. But the problem is less with the program itself and more with the tribal attitudes that people tend to develop. And, a lot of the older crowd in the recovery world is dying off the Vietnam veteran era age guys. But those are the guys I think that really held the belief that if it's not written in this book, then it's not applicable. And you get the same thing in religion, no matter what religion it is. If it's not in our book, then we don't want to hear it. It doesn't apply. But the truth is, the recovery programs or the 12-step stuff was set up in the 50s. And you think about where psychology was at in the 50s. We were still putting people in jail for being gay at that point, or for electroshock therapy to try to change people's behavior and stuff. Like, it was borderline barbaric at that point because it was still in its infancy. But our understanding of psychology of addiction has come so far since then. I mean, that was 70 years ago. We know a lot about why people do what they do, and how childhood experiences impact your adult behavior and all this stuff. So I think for me, the 12-step program helped me, get sober and dry out enough that I could think clearly. And then it taught me how to look at myself, how to self-examine, become self-aware. And I think that's a critical first two steps in any journey to change is you need to be able to see yourself clearly and think about who you are and what you're doing objectively. And so, had I gone straight from, putting the bottle down yesterday and then showing up at the therapist's office today, I don't think that I could have had the success that I've had. I needed that slow transition to, I mean, we're talking about fundamentally changing everything about the way that I think. That's not something that I was even open to in the beginning. I went to AA to try to figure out how to get my drinking under control to where I could stop trying to, molest everybody in the room every time I had a beer in public. So it was necessary for me to go through that process, but it was never going to be enough for me to get where I wanted to be. But, meeting the people that I met in recovery and learning how to change my mind about what I believe, because that's hard to do too. When you're overturning core beliefs that you have, like, I learned everything I know from my parents. And so recognizing that maybe some of that stuff is wrong and I need to change my mind, and that's okay, that doesn't take away from my value as a human being or anything else, but being willing to change my mind about things. It took me a while to learn how to do that. But so I think 7 or 8 years into this journey before I ever even went to therapy the first time, and into it when I went the second time. And, it's for me, it's about committing to change and committing to growth. But, change and growth are really hard. Both are painful, and both are things that, don't happen, easily for most human beings. So.
Yeah. Amen to that. For you, sober is no alcohol.
It used to be, and it still is to a degree, but understanding now that, there's any number of behaviors that I can engage in that will make me feel better about myself in that moment, no matter what it is, whether it's food. I have a tendency towards, eating sweet stuff when I don't feel good about myself, or buying things, especially, with the ease of getting on Amazon and buying something nice. I know that'll make me feel good about myself for a minute. Recognizing when I'm engaging in any of those kinds of behaviors and getting to the why behind it, and understanding that there's obviously something going on that I need to address. That's what I consider sobriety today. It's emotional sobriety, and being ready to catch myself in any sort of thing that I don't want to be engaging in, and fixing the real problem underneath it rather than being self-destructive.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I asked because you said when you initially walked into AA, it was to control your drinking. So I was just curious if control meant zero, or control meant like I got it under control. Like I can go into a social environment, I can have dinner with my wife, I can go to an amazing steakhouse and have a glass of wine with my steak, or I can go to a holiday party and I can limit myself to one or two drinks. For me, I probably never identified myself as an alcoholic. I definitely had issues, much like you. It started at a very young age. Kind of a lot of my behaviors kind of started around 15, 16 years old. But through my 20s and 30s, it's like drinking for me was a chase to black out. And not black out, like pass out, face on the ground, but drink to the point where you don't remember what you're doing, and you're not really aware of the way that you're acting. So that was me for a large amount of time. And just like I've shared multiple times here today, this journey has, been almost 3 years for me now. And initially it was going 18 months without a sip of alcohol. I'm at the point now where I can go to a dinner, I can have 1-2 drinks and cut myself off. So just curious, because I know a lot of people in those programs are like, no, it's completely dry. And I know some people, like, they can't manage it. I've spoke with other, recovering alcoholics, and they're like, yeah, I went 3-5 years without it, and now I'm at the point where I can manage it. So I always love to kind of get people's take on that.
Yeah, mine is 100% abstinence. I haven't had a drop of alcohol in 13 years, but I no longer have a desire to either. And part of it is that I never wanted to have 2 drinks and quit. I wanted to have all of them. So, I am an extremist and an overachiever in just about every way, but that's one of them. But a lot of it,
we're the same.
Also, I have all of that stuff tied to the drinking, that the why I was drinking. And all of the bad behavior that I, did when I was drinking, that I don't know that I could even enjoy it if I tried one today. So I'm just staying away from it.
Yeah, you've reframed your relationship with it.
Yeah.
No, it's great. It's amazing. Appreciate this. Well, Justin, this has been amazing. Real quick, I want to tell people about your book. So why'd you write it? You had this successful, fiction career. You mentioned the wife is a vet, running the practice, running the clinic, doing the podcast with her. So what was the inspiration to write the book, The Righteous Rage of a 10-year-old boy? And then, what can people expect in it? And then where can people find it? I know obviously Amazon, but yeah, just plug the book a little bit. And then what was kind of the inspiration for you to put this story together?
It began as a journal because I was going to therapy once a week, and I was learning so much about myself that there was no way for me to keep it all in my head. So I started going home and writing down all the important things from my therapy sessions. And by the time we were 6 months into it, I had amassed a lot of material, but B, I realized how, while my experiences were my experiences, and a lot of people don't have those experiences, the results of those experiences and the insecurities and the behaviors as an adult are the same for just about everybody. Like, we all have the same insecurities and we deal with them the same way. So I decided to polish it up and turn it into a book. So each chapter is one therapy session, and we talk about whatever the thing is that I want to solve in that session. And then we get into the root of it, and we look at my childhood experiences. And then we reframe. And the thing about EMDR therapy and trauma therapy is that you can change the emotions that are tied to memories. And so once I would realize what the truth was of that situation, and I was not a failure, I was a success, or whatever it was, then we would tap that in and change the way that I felt about myself in that moment. And so each chapter is a demonstration of that. And it becomes sort of repetitive in that there's always an insecurity in there that is based on an untruth. And discovering what that untruth is and replacing it with the truth and positive thoughts is what the whole thing is about. And it's to give people hope that if you feel bad about yourself, you don't have to keep feeling that way. It's possible for you to change that. And I didn't know that for most of my life, even, 10 years sober and way down this road of self-understanding. I didn't know that I could change the way that I feel about myself now and in the past. And so I want to shine that from every billboard that there is, because people need to know, you don't have to feel this way about yourself.
Yeah, that's incredible. Encourage everybody out there to go check out The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy by Justin Boyd Long. So Justin, we have one last question we'd like to end every single episode with, but before we get to that, where can people connect with you? Obviously the book, on Amazon, we'll get everything, shared down in the show notes there below, but if they want to check out the podcast, if they want to connect with you online, or you're hanging out on social media anywhere, just kind of where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yep. Everything that you would want about me is at my website at jboydlong.com. JBOYDLONG, jboydlong.com. And I do have social media presence, but I'm not very active on there. And the more I learn about the destructive nature of social media, the more reluctant I am to participate in that. So I've really been cutting back on. I still see it. If messages come through, you can contact me through there. You can contact me through my website. But and I've got a lot of blogs on my website about self-improvement and self-discovery. So a lot of good stuff.
Got it. Yeah, we'll get all that plugged down, and yeah, I'm right there with you with social media. If it wasn't the number one primary driver for lead generation inside of the business, I'm not sure I'd have it as well. But I need to be on there because that's where the people that need me are hanging out right now.
Yeah, I got the same dilemma.
Yeah, until that issue gets resolved and I can figure out a different way to reach my guys, I'll be on there. But I have a lot of rules around my social media use, and they're self-imposed rules, but they've radically changed my life. So, bro, this has been amazing. I think there's a lot of powerful insights here for people, some self-awareness tools, some real practical strategies. So, really appreciate you for coming on, being vulnerable, for sharing your story, and I appreciate you for hanging out about 15 minutes. So we had some issues with me hanging out in the wrong room, and Justin was very, very kindly just waiting in the proper room. So. Justin, as we bring it home here today, this is a question that we ask every single guest. Obviously, the title of the show is The Superhuman Life. The genesis of it has been kind of my own personal story and transformation. But when I talk about living a superhuman life, for me, it's really a belief system or a way that you show up in the world. And it's the understanding or the belief that we were all put on this earth for a purpose. There's a calling on each one of our lives. So that's the first step. And the second step is that we are empowered to fully bring that purpose to life. Like, we've been given a body, a vessel to manifest it all through. And it's our work that is actually what brings that mission or brings that purpose to life. So it's not just you're here and you're supposed to do this. It's here you partner in life with somebody or something or whatever. We don't need to get into spiritual beliefs here, but that's what I talk about when I living a superhuman life. It's the understanding that we're here for a purpose, but then we need to do everything within our own power to bring that to life. So I always like to get the guest take here. So Justin, as we bring today's conversation to a close, how would you define living a superhuman life?
For me, it's living intentionally. It's understanding why I'm doing the things that I'm doing and not just being a passenger in life. I did that for a long time, and there's no joy in that. But trying to find the borders and the boundaries on my capacity and to expand that and be everything that I can be, and to do it with intention and purpose and direction is what living is all about for me today. It's just being the most that I can be and not accepting those boundaries and pushing them even farther.
Got it. Absolutely. Absolutely love that. Guys, you heard it here. Joy is found in intentionality and purpose. Guys, we love you so much. Thank you for hanging out with us here today. If you're watching there on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on. If you guys want to support us, you want to help this show continue to grow. We're somewhere near 83, 84 countries at this point, thousands of downloads. So we appreciate everybody for hanging out. But if you want to help us grow, you want to help us get this podcast into more people's ears, into more people's heads, you can support us in two different ways. First off, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you haven't done so yet, make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and written review. And secondly, more important than anything, if there's somebody in your life that needs to hear today's conversation, please do us this kind favor with sharing this conversation with them. But for Justin B. Long, Frank Rich, guys, we love you, and we'll see you next week.